neurologist and neurologist practicing in Vienna before the Nazis sort of made Auschwitz. But he actually portrayed much about this new therapy that he's working on called prolotherapy, which of course was the issue of trying to think of the future and not think of what was going on at that moment and project yourself into that new realm of life. And a lot of it is used still today, although it's not called prolotherapy today. Many psychiatrists, sometimes I think I should have been a psychiatrist, but I'm not. But it is interesting. It's a very interesting book.
The Search for Meaning. Man's Search for Meaning. All right, dear class.
If you like something.
Let's see, yes.
Different people are here today.
Yeah, a few different people, yes. So this will be the first class entitled it's something along the lines of the values of our faith seen through the stories of our people. So I want to today begin with a couple of brief stories, ancient stories, come to us from the Midrash, and offer commentary and hopefully elicit a little discussion. So there in the handout that I hope you all have is the first story which will begin this year's class. One day a heathen approached Rabbi Akiba and asked him, "Who created the world?" "God created the world," answered the rabbi. "What proof do you have?" asked the man. "Come back tomorrow," said Akiba, "and I'll give you some proof." When the man returned the next day, Akiba said to him, "That is a nice coat you are wearing. I wonder who made it." "Why, the tailor made it, of course," replied the man. "What proof do you have that a tailor made it?" asked Akiba. "What sort of question is that? Everyone knows that a tailor makes clothes." "In the same way," retorted Akiba, "you can now understand that God created the world." After the non-believer had left, Akiba elaborated further on the theme and said to his disciples, "Just as the existence of a house points to a builder who built it, and the clothes point to a tailor who sewed it, and the furniture to a carpenter who made it, so the existence of the world is proof in itself of an almighty God who created it." So here, through the words of Rabbi Akiba, who I submit along with Rabbi Hillel as one of the two most famous and beloved of the Tanaim, of the rabbis of the 1st and 2nd centuries, here is the creation of the world according to the rabbis. For Judaism, the very first verse in the Torah makes two fundamental assumptions. In the beginning, God, and God created everything that came into existence. So Judaism believes that at first there was nothing, only God. In the beginning, God. And then at a point in time, and in accord with God's will, God created the heavens, the earth, the universe, all existence. This is the cornerstone of Jewish belief. God created, in Latin, ex nihilo. In Hebrew, yesh me'ayin, something out of nothing. He created everything with the Torah in accordance with his will, according to a divine plan, and he continually guides and supervises his creation. So Maimonides, in the Guide for the Perplexed, says, this is the first theory of Judaism. Along with, he says, the oneness of God. That God was alone at the beginning and created everything. So Akiba says to the heretic, to the non-believer, to the atheist, everything around you testifies to the principle that God made it. Now, this is called the argument from design in theology and philosophy. This is a proof for the existence of God called the argument from design. The academic term for it, if we were back in school, we would say this is the teleological proof for God. Anybody? Teleological. From the Greek telos, meaning goal. This is the oldest argument put forth for the existence of God. And Jewish tradition attributes it first to Abraham. Listen what is said here. It's like a man who was traveling from place to place when he saw a mansion all lit up. He wondered, is it conceivable that the mansion is without a caretaker? Thereupon the owner of the mansion appeared to him and said, I am the owner of this mansion, and I am the caretaker. Similarly, Abraham wondered, is it conceivable that the world is without a caretaker? Then God appeared to Abraham and said, I am the master of the universe, and I am its caretaker. So let's pause here for a moment and realize that fundamental to our faith, a foundational principle is, in the beginning God and nothing else. There was no eternal matter along with God, as Aristotle said. There's only God. There is not even non-existence. There is not even nothing. There is only God. And then God created Yesh Ma'ayin, something out of what we call nothing, but there was nothing.
Wasn't the nothing defined as tohu vavohu?
Something out of whatever was there.
The Torah says tohu vavohu, formless and void. But as Maimonides says, the Torah speaks Lashon Adam, in the language of man. We cannot conceive of nothingness that is nothing. So the Torah has to relate to us with a human vocabulary and tell us it was formless and void. We can understand nothing. Gornished. It's nothing. We have a handle on that. But what we're really talking about is beyond what the Torah can even say. So God is not only the creator, but the caretaker. In other words, without God's continuous involvement in the world, everything would revert to what we know as tohu vavohu, formless and void, but what is really the nothingness of nothing. So if God didn't say every single moment that you should continue, that this blade of grass should grow, that this wave should be formed, that this star should move, whatever you can conceive of, if God didn't continually say it, everything would instantly revert to a nothingness that is nothing. So we have a prayer that we say in the morning. Yotzer or uvorei choshech. You know this morning prayer? Oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. These verbs are in the present. Yotzer or, God is the creator of light. Not that he created light. He's still creating light every moment. Uvorei choshech, and he's creating darkness at every moment. Uvorei et hakol, and he is creating, what's hakol? Everything. What?
The ultimate micromanager.
Micro and macro. Simultaneously. All right? He is the Reagan and the Carter. Lahavdil, to make a distinction, but he's got his hand in every little pintala, and yet he's got the whole world in his hands. All right. But how can we prove that what we just said, this fundamental belief, is true? How can we prove it's accurate? If I said to you it's in the Torah, that begs the question. How do we know that the Torah story is accurate, you'd say to me. So Rabbi Akiba in our story employs a proof that combines two arguments. We already said the argument from design. Just as a coat is made by a tailor, proves that the universe is made by a creator. And the argument called prime mover. What is the argument of the prime mover? It is, stay with me, that infinite regression is impossible. Let me let that sink in. Infinite regression is impossible. If I say something made this, I have to go back to what made that. And what made this? Well, something made that. And back and back. But there has to be an uncaused cause, an unmoved mover. There has to be an uncreated creator, because infinite regression is impossible. Something must have started it all without having been started itself. Because if it was started itself, then what came before would be the mover. And then what came before that would be the mover. There had to be an original mover because nothing is here by chance. Go back as far as you can. Here's an analogy I have for you. Bread is on the table because the baker baked it. He obtained the flour because the farmer grew the wheat. The farmer produced the wheat because the rains came down. The sun shone and the earth was nurtured. The rain, sun, and earth were created within the permanent laws of nature. These laws must have been established by a first power. That power is the creator himself, God, the unmoved prime mover. So Akiba is saying there are two proofs for the existence of God. One, look around you. Look at everything. The design, the harmony, the patterns. This is a conscious divine mover. And that mover must have been uncaused himself, because something must be uncaused itself. We call that uncaused cause God. So, before I take your, Akiba can say that the clothes, the house, the furniture all point to the fact of a tailor, a builder, and a carpenter. The very existence of the world is sufficient proof of a prime creator. The nature of the universe is such that it could only have been created by a God of unlimited wisdom and power. The miraculous planetary system, the miracle of the human heart and brain, the development of myriads of species, validate a belief in divine wisdom and a will that created it all. This is all too wondrous to have happened by chance. Now, Judaism does not require these proofs that Rabbi Akiva gave to this non-believer. But Akiba had to resort to them because of the challenge of Greek and Roman philosophy in which he lived. Plato and Aristotle, the challenges of the Greeks and the Romans. They explained the origin of matter without resorting to the existence of a creator. It happened.
Happenstance.
For Judaism, we don't need the proof. It is incontrovertible that in the beginning there was God, and that he is the source of all things in existence. Nothing was there along with him. If you read Greek and Roman mythology, you know that the gods created the existence out of the primordial waters that were coexistent with the gods. For Judaism, there's God who then created the waters. Nothing is eternal, only God. There are things that are now immortal, but eternal means never born. Only God was never born. This has implications for our view of Christianity, of a God who was born and took on human flesh, lived a human career, and died. The teleological argument, the argument from design, counters the claims of those who believe that the universe is eternal and not created. Akiba had to say the universe is eternal with an unmoved prime mover in the face of Greek and Roman theology. Let's look at the next reading. Well, this is something in the middle of the day, isn't it? Boy, oh boy. So, do one of two things. It's either going to wake you up or put you to sleep. I see evidence of both. Let's look. The argument from design, teleological. See it there? It's on page 2. Focuses on the fact that the universe is fit for human habitation. There are many ways that the universe might have been. It might have had different laws of physics. It might have had a different arrangement of planets and stars. It might have begun with a bigger or a smaller Big Bang. And the vast majority of these universes would not have allowed for the existence of life. We're very fortunate indeed to have a universe that does. Assume that modern science is correct in saying that the universe began with a Big Bang. that the universe came into existence with an explosion that sent pieces of matter flying in all directions at an enormous rate. The Big Bang might have been other than it was. It might have involved more or less matter, or have involved a larger or smaller explosion. That the Big Bang occurred as it did was crucial for the development of life, because the rate of expansion of the universe, the speed at which the pieces of matter flew apart, had to fall within certain limits if life was to develop. Had the rate of expansion been too slow, then gravity would have pulled all of the matter back together again in a big crunch. There wouldn't have been enough time for life to emerge. Had the rate of expansion been too fast, then gravity wouldn't have had a chance to pull any of the pieces of matter together. And planets, stars, and even gases wouldn't have been able to form. There wouldn't have been anything for life to emerge on. The rate of expansion following the Big Bang, of course, was Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
Just right.
Just right to allow life to develop. If it weren't, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. That this was the case, though, was either, you have a choice, an extraordinary fluke, or was intended by the Big Bang's creator. Had the rate of expansion been even fractionally slower, 1 part in a million, then the Big Bang would have been followed by a big crunch before life could have developed. Had the rate of expansion been even fractionally faster, 1 part in a million, then stars and planets could not have formed. It is highly unlikely, then, that a random Big Bang would be such as to allow life to develop, and therefore highly unlikely, according to the argument from design, that the Big Bang from which our universe was formed happened at random. You remember in Philosophy 101 where they would say, if you put monkeys in a room with an infinite number of typewriters, do you think that they would produce the works of William Shakespeare? Or that if the printing press exploded and the ink fell all over the room, do you think it would make the works of William Shakespeare? Let's finish. The fact that the universe is fit for life requires explanation, and an appeal to chance is no explanation at all. It is far more likely that the universe was initiated by a being, see the capital B, who intended to create a universe that could support life, and did so out of his will. There's a divine plan. Would it spoil some vast, eternal plan? Can't I have a staircase going down just for show? The fine-tuning of the universe for life can only be explained, here's a statement, with reference to a creator with a capital C as the result of an intelligent design. Each example makes it less likely that the universe was created at random, and more likely that it was designed by a creator who takes an interest in humanity. The argument from design concludes that the universe does just happen to be fit for life, but that it was deliberately created that way. The universe clearly exhibits the marks of intelligent design. All right, let's stop here and see if anyone's still with me, and if there are any questions or comments or responses.
Well, in the middle of that page there,
What's that?
in the middle of that page that you just read, it sort of reminded me of
Diana.
Would have been sufficient.
That's
Or
good. It would have been, yes,
It would have
that's
not
right.
been sufficient.
That's true, yes.
This, I think, makes a really good argument for putting to an atheist is to their belief in the creator of God, and also atheists say in view of what you just read?
Say I have my own opinion.
First of all, if you've ever tried to argue with an atheist,
Say I have my own opinion. No,
you know that it
doesn't work.
the only consequence is upsetting your kishkis. But an atheist would say that all is accident, chance, random, and happenstance. And the argument from design falls when it seems that there are so many occurrences that look to be random. They look to be accidental. So, for instance, if someone said, well, what one person can call a coincidence, I would call Beshert. But that person would not convince me that it was a coincidence that I met this person. And I would not convince the person of coincidence that it was meant to be. Everything is random. We're all just random molecules in a cold, unfeeling universe. It happened this way because nature came to be out of the Big Bang. It's fortuitous. It happened this way. But you can't say that there's a divine intelligence behind it. That's what he would say. His favorite movie would be Coincidence on 34th Street. Yeah.
Your thing about argument from design, I think it was a few years ago, and it had to do with political people were saying that I created this. And they said, no, it wasn't you created it. We created who put the buildings, what generation did this? And
Right.
there's a big
Yeah, I'd like to take that point and teach you that in the Torah, the word borei, borei pri hagafen, creator of the word borei is only used in connection with God. Only God creates. The word for what we do is oseh. Makes, fashions. We take the raw material created by God and fashion it. We combine it, we separate it, we magnify it, we shrink it. We take it and mold it, hopefully in partnership with God. The story I've told in this room a number of times is of the man who challenged God, saying, I don't think it was too difficult to create the world in 6 days. I don't think what you did was such a gadilla. God says, oh yeah? Or something like that. I'm not quoting exactly. I'm paraphrasing. God says, oh yeah? You think you could do it? God says, oh sure. Let me give it a try. God says, go ahead. The man bends down to pick up some dirt. God says, use your own dirt. Only God is the creator, and man takes and fashions. We are, I would say, we're partners with God. You've heard this? But we're very junior partners. I mean, God is the CEO here, and we're in the entry level. Okay? Yes.
As a somewhat educated person, I did pass kindergarten with flying colors, by the way. When we really look at the geology and the metamorphosis that has occurred by these wonderful scientists that we have, then the Earth was a gaseous structure of some sort, billions of years ago. But through the process of confrontation and issues, cooling, what happened, nothing into it, we began to cool down. We had the great ooze, was perhaps founded, digging up the Hoover Dam program before they put the vent dam in and things like that. Where did all this come from? It had to come from somewhere. And so when you look at your presentation this morning and my minuscule knowledge of Genesis, you take a second look at life and really begin to think there's got to be something out there. And then when you look at Steve Jobs, like Barbara had just mentioned a moment ago, here's Steve Jobs, this guy's a genius, but his brain is pretty much like my brain, I mean, but he's wired a little different.
Okay.
He's got maybe a couple extra neurons or axons, who knows what's going on, synapses going on upstairs, that I absolutely cannot even.
He created nothing.
He created from nothing this fantastic thing.
No, he made from,
And, right, but he had basics from.
he didn't make from nothing. He made what wasn't here before.
That's right, okay, I'll give you that.
But he made out of something. Okay.
So,
Right.
so I acquiesce, excuse me a minute, so I acquiesce to say that this is a very interesting presentation this morning because it really allows you to think. You know, it might be true because we are Jewish people and we have to look to that as our beginning way, way back.
Yes, well, I'm glad then. Because in the beginning, God, let's stop there. In the beginning, God, and then the next word, created. That's what Akiba is saying. God was all alone, and the argument from design, he created.
There's a Kabbalistic view.
Kabbalistic view.
I would like you to elaborate on with the Big Bang.
Well, the view is, the Lurianic Kabbalah, the view is different than Genesis. Genesis says all emanated from God's will outwardly. In Kabbalah, God is everything, and therefore there's no place in the nothing. God is everything, so there's no room for anything else. So what Kabbalah says is that God contracted. And he contracted not on the rim of God, because God is everything, in the center, as it were, of God. The amount of a pinhead. That pinhead is the entire universe. The rest is God. So for Kabbalah, it's not sending forth, it's contracting to make room for the universe. And isn't it amazing to think that the smallest amount that we can't even fathom is the entire universe? Beyond ours, beyond, I mean, is all existence.
Makes you feel really important.
Huh?
Makes you feel really important.
Makes you feel unimportant.
Beyond the Milky Way, sure.
Well, you know, Psalm 8 says, "O God, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you take note of him?" We are smaller than the smallest piece of existence. And yet, you know us. You care for us. So no matter how small we are still great in God's scheme. So, let's look at the next, on page, should be 4. Here's an argument. The 18th century theologian William Paley's argument identifies what he takes to be a reliable indicator of intelligent design. I want you to, as we read it, see how this fits in with what Akiba said. Suppose I found a watch upon the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be in that place. I should hardly think that, for anything I knew, the watch might have always been there. Yet why should not this answer serve for the watch as well as for a stone that happened to be lying on the ground? For this reason and for no other, namely, that if the different parts had been differently shaped from what they are, if a different size from what they are, or placed after any other manner, or in any other order than that in which they are placed, either no motion at all would have been carried on in the machine, or none which would have answered the use that is now served by it. For Paley, 2 features of a watch indicate that it is a result of intelligent design. First, it performs a function that an intelligent agent would regard as valuable. That it performs the function of keeping time is something of value to an intelligent agent. Second, it would not perform this function if its parts and mechanisms were differently sized or arranged. The fact that the ability of a watch to keep time depends on the precise shape size, and arrangement of its parts suggests that the watch has these characteristics because some intelligent agency designed it to these specifications. So getting back to the Big Bang, if anything happened slightly less or slightly more or slightly faster, slightly slower, life could not have come into being. If a part of a watch was bigger or smaller, it wouldn't keep time. That must be what happens to my watches. Paley, then, next page. Paley then argues that the material universe exhibits the same kind of functional complexity as a watch. Watch this. Watch what he says. 18th century. Every indicator of contrivance, every manifestation of design which existed in the watch exists in the works of nature, with the difference on the side of nature of being greater and more. It's more complex than a watch. And that in a degree which exceeds all computation. I mean that the contrivances of nature surpass the contrivances of art in the complexity, subtlety, and curiosity of the mechanism. And still more, if possible, do they go beyond them in number and variety. And yet, in a multitude of cases, are not less evidently mechanical, not less evidently contrivances, and not less evidently accommodated to their end or suited to their office than are the most perfect productions of human ingenuity. What does he mean? Here it is. Since the works of nature possess functional complexity, which is a reliable indicator of intelligent design, I mean, this world is complex. Somebody must have created it. We can justifiably conclude that these works were created by an intelligent agent who designed them to instantiate this property. Paley argues that works of nature and human artifacts have a particular property that reliably indicates design. Regardless of how dissimilar a natural object might otherwise be from a watch, both objects exhibit the sort of functional complexity that warrants an inference. What is that inference? It was made by an intelligent designer. If the watch in its relative complexity was made by an intelligent designer, namely a watchmaker, how about the movement of the sun? Doesn't that indicate? Isn't that more complex? How about the human body compared to a watch? Isn't that infinitely more complex? No matter how dissimilar they are, both of them, nature and the watch, in their complexity, testify to a creator who created according to design.
What was his religion?
What's that?
What was his religion?
He was a Christian. Church of England.
Christian.
But sometimes even Gentiles. I mean, you have to give the devil up. Argument from design is also based on the reliability of order argument. Look at the next one, Einstein. Page 6. Einstein recognized the underlying assumption of all science. Is there any reason to assume the rationality of the universe, that reality should follow fixed laws based on unchanging mathematics? Clearly, if the world were not governed by an ultimately rational being, then we would have no reason to trust things physical. However, we all do just that. Everyone trusts the world, and therefore unknowingly trusts its God. Okay? Is that clear? So to summarize, the teleological argument from design draws a simple line from the design of nature to the existence of the creator of everything. It's a line from nature to nature's God. Just as the complexity of a watch indicates an intelligent watchmaker, so the complexity of nature is a sign of God. Modern science has revealed that the complexity of nature far outshines the complexity of man-made objects. So if you look at a man-made object and say this had a maker, when you look at the more vast complexity of nature, you must ipso facto ergo see a divine creator. Now, let me just raise one thing, and then we'll go on to the next story. Judaism does not object to the concept of evolution per se. I'm often asked, what does Judaism think about evolution? Judaism accepts evolution, but with certain conditions. The main point of the Torah is that everything was created in potential on the first day. Now, what do we mean by a day? Do we mean 24 hours as we know a day? No. Just as we cannot comprehend formless and void, nor can we comprehend what a day means. We can perhaps best call it a stage of development. Might be eons. Everything was created in potential on the first day, and from that first stage on, everything emerged in an evolutionary way. That's what the Torah says. Everything evolved, stage by stage. Here's the conditions that the Torah requires. There are 5. 5 conditions the Torah, and if you said to me, Rabbi, will this be on the test?
Yes.
Yes, this is going to be on the test. 5 conditions required for a Torah true belief in evolution. Number 1, that the theory of evolution is open to the fact that creation was ex nihilo. As long as evolution says that at one time there was nothing from nothing, we can accept evolution. We cannot accept eternal matter. In other words, we cannot accept that the elements that went into the Big Bang were always there. Because when the Big Bang exploded, or banged, it exploded matter. We cannot say that the Big Bang created that matter. It's not an intelligent, willful, it's not a being. So number 1, creatio ex nihilo. Yesh me'ayin, something out of nothing. That's number 1. The second condition required for a Torah true belief in evolution. The first day, or the first stage of creation, cannot be seen as more primitive than the next days. On the contrary, the first day was higher spiritually than the next day's creations. What did God create on the first day, at the first stage?
Heaven and earth.
Light and darkness. But it's not the physical light and darkness that we know, because God didn't create the sun and the moon until several days later. This is the light of God. This is a spiritual, primordial, this is a light that's not physical. That was the apex of creation, the first day. So we're not looking for the descent only. Everything is less than was on that first day. Number 3, all evolutionary developments occurred because God said so. Nothing in evolution was by chance, happenstance, or random. Everything in evolution happens because God wills it. God's providence. Number 4. This world is the most perfect for which this world was made. That doesn't mean the world is perfect. It's imperfect. Why is it imperfect? We have to have free will. We have to have free choice. But it means that this world is perfect for what it was intended to do. What did you, I didn't hear.
It's a fact you can't eat.
Is that right?
Perfect. We're on the, everything is perfect.
Wonderful, you see? But we had it first. And 5, that man is regarded as the pinnacle of physical creation. Let me say it this way. Man is the purpose of creation. God created everything as suitable for us. God made everything for us. That's the Torah view. We are the pinnacle of creation. Any questions about those?
So everything that created first was all in preparation.
Everything is in preparation for our appearance, for our arrival. The stage is set, the curtain, and we make our entrance. All the world's a stage. Yes.
I can understand the Big Bang Theory. They say about all the matter that exploded and became all.
That could be just another name for what Genesis says.
Except that how do they, who don't believe in God, justify the creation of things that breathe, and things that
Yeah,
have soul?
yeah, yeah.
Where's that supposed to
Yeah.
come from?
In answer to the question you posed before, the question you just posed, design for the atheist does not require a designer, willful creator. It does not require it.
Just happens.
It happened. So Rabbi Akiba and we would sit here and say, how could that be? They would say, prove that there is a creator. Where is it? I would say, well, how about the teleological argument? See, well, that's good for philosophy 101, but no, I'm not convinced. I can't see it. Show me. I can see the results of the Big Bang all around me. I don't see a divine creator. Show me. Maybe this is why we're not atheists. Now, there are those who say, deists, who say there was a willful designing creator. God created everything, just like we're saying,
And he left.
but then he left.
And he left.
Then he went on a permanent vacation and left everything to run by itself. So there's no involvement. This, for example, could be what Reconstructionists say. Yes, there could be a God, but he's no longer involved with us. You can't pray to this God. Doesn't care anymore. He's gone.
That's how people justify the Holocaust.
Right. Well, all right. The watchmaker made this watch and then went on to another watch. He's not still involved with this watch. Same with God. Made a beautiful watch, made a beautiful universe, and then left.
So would prayer be like calling customer service?
What's that?
Would prayer be like calling customer service? I guess that.
Well, prayer, yeah, you know, you have a divine bellhop who's,
That'd be a trouble as being a whole lot.
yeah. Me too, yes.
But I just say, Rabbi, when I got into the first grade, I thought, where did neutrons come from?
Yeah.
And I thought about that. I couldn't really decide where the neutrons came from. But as you know, the other day, these two scientists from China and from Canada did achieve the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Because they
Nobel.
did determine where the neutrons came from.
Yeah.
The fact that they could have metamorphosis as the second most plentiful item in this world of
Yeah.
ours. Secondary to photon, which is primary. So God, I would say, and your statements are so perfect, that God had to make this.
Yes.
They didn't just come out of the sky. They had to come from something.
Out of the sky. Yeah, there was, right.
That's it. I mean, they had to come from
So
somewhere.
again, Einstein, everyone trusts the world, therefore everyone unknowingly trusts its God. Even the atheist is not going to step off a bridge. He's going to trust what's going to happen if he steps off a building. Gravity is going to take over, and that's it. He trusts the world. So for Einstein, if you trust the world, you must trust God. Now, all right, let's look at, I only have a few minutes. Let's look at the second story, story 2. This one I talked about a little bit in my shiur on Yom Kippur. You with me on page 7? Abraham's family were all heathen idol worshippers. His father was even an idol maker. One day Abraham was sent to the market with a basket full of idols made by his father with instructions to sell them. But each time a customer came to buy, Abraham dissuaded him with a reasoned argument. "How old are you?" he asked one customer. "I'm 70 years old," was the reply. "How ridiculous for you who have lived 70 years to worship an idol of wood that was made only yesterday." Hearing this, the man threw the idol back into the basket and left. This is not a salesman, you know. This is,
He was selling something else.
no, you should be in a different business. All day long, Abraham confronted his customers with these and similar arguments. With the result, he had no sales. I mean, the quarterly profits just didn't, the bottom line just didn't. Disappointed with Abraham's failure as a salesman, the family decided he should stay at home and serve the idols as their priest. "What does a priest do?" asked Abraham. "He attends to all their needs," was the answer. In the middle of the afternoon, a woman entered the house and bought a bowl of fine meal as an offering to the idols. "Here," she said, "give this to the gods." When she left, Abraham took a big stick and smashed all the idols to bits, leaving only the biggest idol untouched, and into its hands he fixed the stick. When his father returned home and saw the havoc in his workshop, he asked Abraham what had happened. His son replied, "During the afternoon, someone brought in some food as a gift for the idols. As soon as she placed it down, there was a scramble for the food, and this big one took the stick and began smashing all the others so that he could have all the food for himself." His father became angry. "What nonsense are you telling me? The idols are only pieces of wood or stone. They cannot see, they cannot hear, they cannot move, they can't do anything. They do not live." Abraham answered, "Father, what you have just said is true. Do your ears hear what your mouth is saying?" Concluding that idol worship and the pagan beliefs of his contemporaries were false, Abraham began to search for religious truth, and his mind changed from one notion to another. At first, he believed that the earth itself was God. Since it was benevolent, it produced food for humankind. Then he pondered that the true God must be self-sufficient and does not need to be served by any other element, like the earth that needs the rain, which enables it to grow the produce. So he began to think of the radiant sun as God, since the sun is not served by anything else. But then the sun set and disappeared, its place taken by the moon and stars. Thinking on these phenomena, Abraham concluded that neither the sun nor the moon represents the deity, since God is permanent. He does not change and is not replaced by anything else. He then affirmed, there must be a separate power who made the earth, the sun, the moon, and all existence. In this way, Abraham gradually came to the belief in the one God, creator of all things. In other words, it wasn't a flash of insight or inspiration, or God speaking to him and saying, "Here I am, yoo-hoo." It was a gradual process of elimination. Abraham went to this belief, that belief, until he found the belief in the one true, uncaused cause, prime mover, designing God 4,000 years ago, and today we, his descendants, still share that belief called monotheism. Yes?
So, where do you think that Abraham got these characteristics of a God? So, the self-sufficient, doesn't need to be served, not served by anything else, permanence.
Yes, Abraham looked at everything in nature, saw that it had qualities that could not be God, because his conception of God was influenced by those idols that were made. Something had to make them. The idol maker, let's say his father,
So in other words, he knew what a God
should be.
couldn't be.
He knew what a God couldn't
You
be.
know, some doing it in the negative, but
And maybe it was through I can't say which one. Either he knew what a God should be, or through a process of elimination, discarded all the couldn't be's, and what was left
Was it could be.
was the guy, but who knows what. Either way, he came upon this revolutionary, world transforming belief in the one God that influenced all of humankind. All right. So, to conclude, Abraham is the first patriarch of our people. How does Abraham become the founder of Judaism? By recognizing God as a single supreme being. What an act of courage and insight this must have been when everyone around you thinks differently. I used to say to the teenagers in confirmation class with peer pressure, I said to them, you think you have peer pressure? Try being Abraham. You are all alone in the whole world with your belief. That's something. And yet you stood up to the test and the challenge and discovered and taught, regardless of the consequences, your belief. You had a Yiddish cup. Now, Abraham, in chapter 14 of Genesis, is called by a name. He's called the Ivri. I-V-R-I. Ayin Vet Resh Yud. He's called the Ivri. The people of Canaan call him Avraham Ha-Ivri. Abraham the Ivri. Ivri comes from the root avar, meaning other side. The Canaanites would call him this because he came to Canaan from the other side of the Tigris-Euphrates River. He came from the other side. It's a geographic term. But the rabbis in the Midrash say it's a spiritual term. Other side, all the world was on one side, and Abraham was on the other side. From the word Ivri, we get the word Hebrew. Hebrew. We, as Hebrews, have always been on the other side. Our view has always been in the minority. Except in Israel, we've always been a minority people, haven't we? We've always been Ivrim. Ivrim. When Jonah is pulled up from the, what do you call the bottom of a ship?
The hull?
Whatever, huh? The hold, whatever he's called. He's hauled up from third class where he's sleeping. And the sailors want to know what's the cause of this storm. And they say, who are you, Jonah? He says, Ivri Anochi. I am a Hebrew. And I serve the God of Israel. Ivri Anochi. I am a Hebrew. This word, Abraham is the first one to be called an Ivri. So he was what you might call an iconoclast, an idol smasher. So he is the pioneer of monotheism, the first one. Okay. God chose Abraham, Abraham chose God. Finally, this idea of the one God that we find in this story number 2 that I'm offering today with Abraham, this has great theological significance that there's one God. Remember your Greek and Roman mythology? There's a god of the ocean, and there's a god of thunder, and there's a god of the fields, and there's a god of war, and a god of peace, a goddess, and and they're always fighting each other for control and sovereignty and battling each other. Only one God means that there is a unity to the universe. It's a universe. It's not broken up into turf. It's not with the mafia war in New York, where everyone, up to this block I run the gambling, and that block you run the extortion, like the gods of the Greeks and Romans. What a tremendous theological concept. But what I want to end with is that this idea of one God has tremendous sociological significance. This is one God who created one humankind. All human beings in the sight of God are members of a family. We're all related. The Midrash says that is why God created only Adam and Eve. He could have gotten it all over with and created 6 billion people. Why go, bam. Why did he create Adam and Eve singular? To show that we are all descended from one parent, one couple. We're all branches on Adam and Eve's family tree. The Midrash goes further. It says that when God created Adam out of the dust of the earth, he took the dust from the 4 corners of the earth to show the universality of Adam and all the world. The word Adam, means humanity. Not just the name of a person, it means humankind. So we are all members of one family. There is one God who created one universe within which there is one family of man, which unifies all of existence, top to bottom. And the Torah says that the one God is the source of all law. God wants that law to be applied evenly and equally to all humankind. Everyone is to be treated equally. One God, one universe, one humankind, one law. The Torah frequently says there is one law for the Israelite and the stranger who sojourns among you. There's not a law for the rich and a law for the poor, the white or the black or the American and the European or the rich or the poor, the old or the young, any other man-made superficial distinction. There's only one law for all, the Torah for us. So we are all to be treated. Love your neighbor as yourself is for all humankind. One law, one universe, one family, one God. That is really the Jewish proposition, oneness. And so we see a doctrine like the Trinity as a violation of our absolute monotheism, our radical monotheism. Once you say 3, let me say this as articulately as possible. It ain't 1. 3 ain't 1. One is one. Three is three. And never the twain shall meet. So here we have in this second vignette, you see how it goes along with the first? That Abraham now discovers this unmoved prime mover. What's the Midrash doing here, by the way? In the Torah portion, Lech Lecha, chapter 12 of Genesis, you know Lech Lecha, go forth, God calls Abraham at age 75. There is nothing in the Torah about the previous 5 years. We don't know anything about Abraham's childhood, adulthood, maturity. By the way, there are 4 ages of man: childhood, adulthood, maturity, and you look terrific for your age. So, Abraham, the Midrash is filling in the biography by saying, this is how he came to be called by God. He deserved to be called by God. God called him purposely because he had discovered God. And now this God spoke to him, entered into a relationship with him. Okay? So here we have some of the basic ideas of Judaism drawn from 2 of the ancient Midrashim, thousands of years old, of the stories of our people, one with Rabbi Akiba, one with Abraham. And God willing, if you come back, we'll continue again. What's the next date? A couple of weeks?
2 weeks?
3 weeks?
I don't know. 2 weeks?
I don't know either.
2 weeks.
So,
Next week is
3
Rabbi
weeks?
Gersh. No, 2 weeks. And then you.
Aren't I out of town in 2 weeks? I think it's 3 weeks.
Gersh is doing 2 weeks. I was going to announce.
So what is it?
Alright, so in next week and the following week, Rabbi Gersh will be teaching. And then but the week after that, stay tuned, Rabbi Miller will be.
3 weeks from today, God willing, we should all be here in
3
good
weeks
health.
from
Does it
today,
have a
which
date?
will be the 28th. But so Rabbi Miller will be speaking. And then with your permission, don't miss on the 25th, Dean Erwin Chemerinsky is coming to the Temple Bat Yam.
For the second time?
For the
Yes.
second time to speak about.
He's from Southside Chicago.
Right, to speak about some of the Supreme Court decisions, and then also Dennis Prager is coming on October 18th. If you haven't got your tickets, get your tickets now. And I believe that's.
Chemerinsky will be speaking from the left side, left perspective.
No
I don't know
doubt.
what side of the podium he's going to be standing on.
No doubt. Next time you look at your watch, think about, okay, shalom.
Rabbi.